All right, I have 12:30 PST on my clock, and we're gonna get started here. We're in the How to Retrofit Big Buildings session, a case study here. I'm Isaac Niffing, Buildings Analyst at GreenBiz, and I'm thrilled to have you all here today. So before working at GreenBiz, I spent several years managing energy retrofits throughout the California Community College system. So I had the pleasure of working on both the facilities planning and maintenance sides of buildings, and I appreciated there that I could see a project through its entire life cycle, really from the seedling of an idea to its commissioning and to its ultimate end use. So this is a topic that's dear to me, and I'm thrilled to be your moderator today. So just a couple of housekeeping rules. This event is going to be recorded and will be available a couple weeks after on demand if you want to refer back to our conversation today. At the conclusion of the session, please take the survey pinned at the top of the chat box that Samantha has there. And also just get acquainted with the left side of the hop-in screen where we have the chat where you can chime in with your general comments and support. Q&A is where you can post questions to us specifically. So I'll be peppering in audience questions throughout the whole panel as I see fit. And we'll be leaving 10 to 15 minutes at the end specifically for your questions. For now, I'd like to learn who's joining us today, so please check the polls tab in the right to share what perspective you're bringing to the conversation today. So a little bit of background. So large buildings have a unique patchwork of systems that are often updated, amended, and replaced at different points throughout the lifetime of the space. So as owners and tenants come and go, buildings constantly adapt to match the performance, the comfort, the public health, and the sustainability demands of the people that use them. However, retrofitting buildings is a delicate dance. Oftentimes, it's like trying to fix a bike while you're riding it, as people still rely on the spaces that are being updated to live, work, and recreate in. So this is a major challenge, as we also need to rapidly accelerate the rate at which we make our buildings more efficient while ensuring they aren't relying on fossil fuels. This is a journey that our panelists are intimately familiar with and are using their diverse skill sets to tackle building electrification and retrofits. So today we're going to explore and hear about the technical, the financial, and the social dimensions of retrofitting large buildings. I'm joined by Anish Tilak, a manager with RMI's Carbon-Free Buildings program, where he manages projects in the Pathways to Zero initiative. He's worked extensively with project teams in the commercial and institutional sectors, managing analysis that supports net zero energy design, building electrification, low carbon concrete, mass timber construction, and renewable energy microgrids. We're also joined by Marcel Eclevia, chief engineer at Levi's Plaza for Jamestown Urban Management. Marcel brings over 15 years of experience at Levi's Plaza. So Marcel understands the unique attributes of each building at Levi's Plaza better than anybody else. He's responsible for the safety, the efficiency, and the comfort of the buildings. And Marcel will be sharing this crucial viewpoint of the building operator with us today. And we're also joined by Becca Rushin. She's the director of ESG at Jamestown LP, the owner of Levi's Plaza, and has led sustainability and corporate responsibility initiatives at Jamestown for nearly a decade, and is leading Jamestown's progress towards net zero carbon operations across its portfolio by 2050. So Becca is going to start off with this case study by sharing a bit more context about the property and this ambitious project. I'll turn it over to Becca to get us started.
Thank you, and I appreciate you driving the slides. I'm going to start and do just the Jamestown introduction. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Jamestown, we're a design-focused real estate investment and management firm. We've been around for over 38 years, and our goal is to transform spaces into innovation hubs and community centers. Isaac, can I see my slides? Or
can you see that now?
That's better. Okay, perfect. I wasn't sure if they were happening in the background. So you can go to slide 3.
There you go.
Perfect. So placemaking, sustainability, and innovation and technology, that's really our special sauce. And that's how Jamestown achieves our overall company mission. And I think this project that we're about to talk about, Levi's Plaza, kind of checks all of those boxes. You can go to the next slide. And I have to just kind of talk about where this Levi's Plaza net zero goal fits into Jamestown's broader sustainability initiatives. We've been working on ESG programs for a long time, since 2008. And over that time, we've really kind of evolved and tweaked our program to make sure that we are continuing to set goals that are ambitious, but also achievable. And so the case study that we're about to go into is a great example of that. You can go to the next slide. I'd love to tell you that I deserve all the credit for the Levi's Plaza electrification and net zero initiative. But to be totally honest, this idea for this project came from our asset manager at the time. So he was thinking creatively about how we can attract best-in-class tenants, how we can help those tenants attract talent, and how we can make Levi's Plaza a place where people want to work and recreate, and a place where people want to be. Next slide. And so we looked at all kinds of crazy ideas. This campus, Levi's Plaza, it's a mix of historical buildings ranging from 1903 to 1907. We've got low-rise buildings along with one high-rise. And the buildings were all built in a range of years. Some were built in the 80s. It really runs the gamut. Marcel's going to talk a little bit more about the systems, but basically it's multi-story commercial buildings. They have chiller plants, cooling towers, air handler units, gas-fired boilers with VAV reheats at the zone level and the floor level. And if I'm speaking like scientific language that you don't understand, that's no big deal. We are going to do our best to stay out of like the deep technical weeds. But in short, I'll just say that the building systems are a little bit complicated. And each of these buildings has its own central plant and is running older, less efficient equipment on an old building automation system. You can go to the next slide. So, the efficiency and electrification project that we are going to talk about is part of this broader net zero strategy. But I want to be clear that this strategy is really only possible because of these strategic energy efficiency improvements and the electrification project that allows us to decarbonize between now and 2025. But there's other stuff that we're doing as well. You can go back to the one you were just on. The slide that you're looking at now, that this is a decarbonization priority waterfall, what you see on the right. This is a tool from the Department of Energy's Better Climate Challenge and Low Carbon Pilot, which we participate in. And it's kind of like my go-to resource for how to visualize this. So we're going to talk about the first two, energy efficiency and electrification, in terms of some of the nuances of what we've done at Levi's. So now's the fun part where I get to chat with Marcel. And any of us who work in facilities or with facilities teams, we know that the building engineers are really the MVPs when it comes to energy efficiency projects, and we can't do anything with their knowledge. So Marcel, I'm going to make this a little conversational. What was your first thought when you heard that Jamestown had made this net zero commitment and was going to move forward with this electrification project for Levi's? And you can go to the next two pictures, Isaac.
Hi, Becca. How you doing? That was too nice. Glad to be here and share my perspective. I think it's different from all engineers, but throughout my career, I've always been open to new technology. I knew when Jamestown acquired the property or the buildings that they had some long-term HVAC upgrades in their capital budget. And when I heard that we were going electric, my wheels started to kind of turn, and trying to think of how we can work through this to maximize the benefits of the project and work through all the different challenges. At first, we were just going through the modeling and the planning phase of this, and today we are just about there, completed our first building upgrades. So it's pretty exciting, and also to be the first retrofit electrification project in San Francisco. So it's all new.
Yeah, totally. And you can skip 2 slides, Isaac. But one of the funny things we did when we first had this crazy net zero idea was to work with Integral to identify how much solar we could put on the campus to offset all of our electricity use. and y'all will all enjoy this. The answer was that we could put a very large solar array over the entire campus, which is like a 5-building, like giant block. So it was a really interesting thought exercise and rendering, but nonetheless not very realistic. So Marcel, we're looking at a picture of the old electrical switchgear. We've talked about how these buildings are older. What kind of challenges did this pose? And we'll go ahead and skip to the next slide, which is the after.
Yes, Becca. Well, of course, one of the biggest challenges in the beginning, especially when going electrification, is of course making sure you have the electrical infrastructure to accommodate this new equipment. So what we have to do is we have to, get electrical engineers on board and do a survey of the building. And once they completed their survey, we found out that we just needed just under an additional 1,000 amps, for this project. And with a little bit of, a little bit of redistribution of some power to the penthouse and some upgrading of some of the equipment, we pretty much were able to reuse the system that we had in place already. And this we're real happy to hear about, because there was talks about possibly having to upgrade the utility service of the building. And we knew that this would be quite an expense, because now we're looking at, upgrading the entire switchgear for the building.
Yeah. And I think between HVAC electrification, electric vehicle charging, all of these large electric loads that we see kind of in play at the building level, it's crucially important that you plan for that infrastructure so you don't have to pay for it later. Marcel, I know that, you've been running this equipment for a long time. What were some of the nuances of tying into older equipment? Was it in pretty good shape? Did we have to replace some of it? How did that work out?
Well, we ended up doing a full mechanical upgrade, so we replaced everything on our rooftops. But I think one of the things that's important, especially when you're replacing, the majority of your equipment, is making sure that your electrical switchgear or your motor control centers, which power this equipment on the roof, is in order. So you want to make sure that you do a full survey, investigation, maintenance of this equipment, and make sure everything is good. We opted to replacing the entire gear because it was old equipment. There was no longer parts available for this, and in the past we already had issues with poor connections or faulty boxes throughout all the years. It was there during the original construction. And the one thing you don't want to find out later on in this project is that you burn out a brand new piece of equipment, And so we definitely didn't want to do this. And also we didn't want to have an additional shutdown of the building if we had to do an electrical project. So we decided to do everything all at the same time.
Not to mention, you can spend a lot of time on eBay trying to find some of those old parts that aren't really available, right?
We've been on eBay all
yeah.
Yes.
Isaac, you can go to the next photo. I think the next 2 photos actually is what I'm really excited about, which are these electric heat pumps. I know that an air-cooled system like this is a lot cooler than the temperature of heat coming from a gas-fired boiler. How are you confident that this equipment could get us to the proper heating temperature?
Yeah, no, that's correct. Becca, when you're doing an air cooled, so our system pretty much called for an air cooled heat pump, and it produces a lower intensity heat compared to a gas fired boiler. So about 125 degrees of heating water versus 180 degrees. And so you definitely want to make sure you get with your mechanical engineer and make sure that the existing equipment at the zone or floor level, is adequate for this new system. So you want to make sure you do that, because the last thing you want to do is have all of this equipment installed and you find out that you have improperly sized equipment at the floor level and you can't satisfy the building. So this is definitely something you need to do. It's something you can do at the time of the upgrade, or you can do it in phases as tenants start to roll out, but your mechanical engineer, will be the one to be able to direct that.
Yeah. And Isaac, will you show the next one of the equipment on the roof? San Francisco always has the best skyline views, I feel like. Yeah, there we go. Marcel, how was it working with in-place tenants to do this upgrade?
Well, it definitely was challenging. The majority of the work was done during regular business hours, and just kind of careful planning and scheduling any of the noisy work, hot work, anything that was being done that can be a problem for the tenants. So we made sure to do that after hours, and so luckily at this particular building, it has three zones, three penthouses. So what we did was we scheduled it, and we did a zone at a time, or a quadrant of the building at a time. So we were able to minimize the downtime of the building, at least keeping 2/3 of the building running at all times.
Nice. And I'm just super aware of time. Isaac, can you flip through the next two images? I just wanted to kind of narrate this part. So what we're looking at is a boiler that we moved to the roof to use for supplemental heating on a temporary basis. I'm going to save these pictures and maybe let Marcel talk about these in the Q&A portion. But I know I'm really eager to hand it off to Anish and kind of get his perspective. But Marcel, any final thoughts before we hand it off to Anish, just in terms of like words of advice for any engineers taking on this sort of project?
I would just say keep in mind that if you're doing a project, this first one definitely was there was a learning curve, on this, especially dealing with all of the issues with shipping and manufacturing. So it did kind of extend the scheduling of this project a little bit longer. But I think that after looking at the schedules moving forward to the rest of the projects, we're doing 2 buildings right after this, starting in August, and it looks like the time schedules are definitely much condensed now.
Awesome.
Thank you both. I really appreciate you incorporating the progress so far and the before and after photos. And Marcel, you bring your unique perspective as an operator here. Anish, I'm hoping you can help us zoom out a little bit and contextualize this project, Levi's Plaza, in terms of broader upgrades in commercial buildings throughout the United States. So, can you give us a little bit of context of how common is the configuration of the HVAC system that Levi's Plaza has throughout the U.S.? And can you paint a picture of, what are the guts of existing buildings throughout the U.S.?
Sure. And actually, if I could share my screen, I could pop up some charts that would be illustrative for this conversation. Is that?
Sure. I can.
Yeah, I think that should be sharing right now. Let me just pull up full screen mode.
There you go.
Great. So this chart is from a US data set that speaks to, for commercial floor space in the country, what the common space heating system types are. So I find this really useful because it shows kind of what the distribution is. So you can see at the top, the most common system types really are packaged heating units. So those are rooftop units that have the heating and cooling within the unit itself. The system type that is on Levi's Plaza is actually more of a centralized system, right, with a central plant. And those are slightly less common, but of course, more common in large, big buildings. So this chart is just showing the overall distribution of floor space. But if you look at big buildings alone, they're primarily central plants, and you'll see boilers as the main source of heating there. And so at RMI, we've been thinking about these 2 configurations of heating systems in existing buildings, existing commercial buildings, a little bit differently. So packaged heating units are an exciting opportunity because they could be one-to-one swap outs, right? So you don't need to do a whole extensive set of renovations. You can potentially put in a kit on the rooftop that can then provide heating to the buildings, versus for a central plant, there might be more complex renovations, which I think Marcel and Becca spoke to. I wanted to share this framework, kind of zooming out and thinking about what how to decarbonize large buildings. And the heat pump installation, while really exciting and is really kind of the the end state of electrification and decarbonization, the first step is really figuring out how to make your building more efficient. So, figuring out how to reduce heat usage, heating loads in the building, and then also a really good opportunity is recovering heat within the building. So in big buildings, there's a lot of internal loads that drive HVAC loads. And so you could even be in the middle of winter and have cooling, and cooling systems have heat rejection. So you want to recover that heat as much as possible. So heat recovery is a really valuable opportunity that I wanted to point out as well.
Thank you, Anish. I think this is a really helpful visualization of what the process of decarbonizing buildings does from a metrics perspective, right? What are we reducing? What are we increasing here to provide comfort in the building? David Schmidt brought up a really good question about the building envelope. In a previous session with Sarah Neff, a similar question was asked. How important? So is retrofitting or doing anything with the building envelope a part of the Levi's Plaza project? And after that, Anish, I was hoping you could share a little bit about the importance of that in the broader context of retrofitting buildings.
Marcel, let me know if you know more than I do on this one, but I think part of the challenge with building envelope improvements for Levi's, and I think this is the case with a lot of buildings that Jamestown owns, is that there's historical considerations. So we're limited to what we can do, anything regarding the envelope and the facade. So beyond, just kind of, maintaining the envelope that exists, I don't think we consider doing anything major. I'd also mention that at least one of the buildings is kind of fully occupied by Levi's, who's the main tenant and has their headquarters. And so, we don't have a ton of control over, all of those spaces on an ongoing basis. So again, it's a little bit limited with tenants in place in terms of what we could do.
Thank you.
I would just add that one thing that we're challenged with existing buildings is that they are perceived as snowflakes. Each one is different, and that is not just each building, but also the climate that it's in. So, the property that is being described is in San Francisco, a temperate climate where the challenge for meeting the heating loads in winter is less daunting than it would be in colder climates. So we often, I'm also located in the Bay Area, so we often use Bay Area projects as sort of the beachhead to demonstrate viability of these technologies and create a market. But the kind of 5 to 10 year vision is that the heat pump technology is there to really scale these solutions to colder climates across the country as well.
I'm glad you pointed that out. And Marcel, I don't know if you're laughing on the inside, but we've been exploring different energy management information system technologies across the portfolio, including in the Bay Area. And one thing that we've seen at other buildings, and we know we're going to see this at Levi's, is that, we basically have hot sides of the building and cool sides of the building, just based on kind of where the sun hits. And it's a problem that we think we can overcome with some additional temperature sensors and just kind of some, getting some better feedback within the software. But yeah, it's even with a relatively mild climate, San Francisco does have some challenges. Of course, being here in Georgia, we have a lot of humidity and a whole nother set of issues. So you're right. It's us owners, we always claim to have special snowflakes. And I will acknowledge that some of them really are special, but I don't think we're alone. And that's one of the reasons we like to share and chat through this stuff, just because I think you have to tackle it from a, kind of critical problem solving methodology. So
when many facilities begin this journey of doing a large retrofit, I love the analogy of a snowflake here. On that topic, a big barrier they face is understanding what the existing conditions are and finding the documents to actually support, what is our baseline condition here? I was hoping you could share a little bit about, was this a challenge getting as-built and finding the proper documentation? And are you moving forward? Are you digitizing your records?
Yeah,
You want to take that one, Marcel?
No, it's very challenging because I was here with the old ownership group, and there was nothing digitized. So just trying to find as-built was a challenge. We have them all over and just hidden in different storages here and there. So we're in the process of that, and trying to get as-built it has been challenging, for us.
And Marcel, I feel like this is not uncommon for facilities that haven't transacted in a while. The more a building transacts, the more chances it has to kind of get all of that documentation in order for new ownership. And it's just something that kind of happens. And I think it's easy to take for granted that for a facility that hasn't really been in like prime time and hasn't had people doing, very detailed document reviews, it probably hadn't been requested until we started asking.
Yes, getting better now though.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Anish, if you don't mind, would you mind unsharing your screen so we can thank you? Yeah. Becca, I want to chat a little bit about the financials of this project. When you first, why Levi's Plaza and why now? And was it a big sell once you saw the final price tag of what this would likely cost? Was there sticker shock?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to speak very generally here because frankly, I never had to do any financial analysis for this project. I think from, admittedly, we have a little bit of a kind of leadership mindset when it comes to these types of initiatives. So I think our asset manager felt empowered, and that's really what got him thinking. But at the end of the day, I mean, I think we had underwritten a big HVAC modernization. We hadn't necessarily decided during underwriting or diligence that we were going to go the all electric route. But I think when the question was posed to us, it was less of a what's the cost premium to do this and more of a what's the risk and the cost of not doing it. We see the writing on the wall, right? Like we knew we wanted to take a leadership stance, both with the net zero carbon commitment, but also just with our ability to, manage our electric load. And so, it wasn't a big cost premium. It wasn't something that was, heavily debated. It was kind of like, this is a no-brainer for us. We knew that we weren't going to have another opportunity anytime soon to really have this much of an impact, right? Like we have a lot of buildings. I don't know if it was Anish or Marcel that was saying it's very common for buildings to do upgrades kind of floor by floor as tenants turn over. But, this kind of depth of HVAC improvements, this was our opportunity to do something big at Levi's. So, we were glad to have the project budgeted, but I don't think it was a big premium to make the electric heat pump choice.
Yeah, no, if I could speak on this, we're excited to kind of see what the system will do when the entire building is implemented. Right now we just have that particular building that we did is a 4-story building, and one of the floors was completely upgraded, new BAS system, with a complex sequence of operation. And we just did a test just for that particular floor alone, and we were able to reduce the energy being used on that floor about 65-70% from what we used to use. So what we used to have is basically we have 6 supply fans that serve that building, and it was always constant volume. Not to get too technical, but it was always pushing air 60 hertz all the time, always trying to make static pressure. We had the system as low as 0.1, 0.3 inches of static. And running as low as 4 amps to 6 amps per fan, as where we used to run over 30 amps per fan. So it'll be nice to see once everything is done, really what that building can do.
Sure. And just to unpack a little bit of jargon for some of our listeners, you mentioned BAS and BMS. A building automation system. Yeah, it's essentially a window into the controls of how the HVAC is operated, similar, synonymous with building management system. And building static pressure here is really, measurement of, one of the kind of prime measurements of how well the HVAC is working in the building. Anish, I wanted to go over to you, and we have a Victoria offered a question here about how owners are paying for upgrades. I'm curious if you could share a little bit about the financing mechanisms that are used for retrofits across the country, and specifically her questions about CPACE financing.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's a lot of different funding to leverage and financing mechanisms. I would say CPACE is probably the most leveraged to implement sustainability investments in projects. But one thing that we're seeing is that there's more public dollars going towards decarbonization of building systems. So there's funding for weatherization, which could be used to make efficiency investments in envelope. And again, there's always utility and energy efficiency programs as well. One thing that we've been advocating for is the ability to use those energy efficiency, utility-based energy efficiency programs for fuel switching, because in many states there are restrictions that preclude the use of those funds for fuel switching. But that is changing, and I think more and more we'll see there being a larger pool of efficiency dollars available for broader decarbonization that will enable kind of this full package of efficiency plus electrification in buildings.
And two plugs, Anish. The Better Buildings Solution Center, it's called the Better Buildings Financing Navigator, is a Department of Energy tool that I actually think is really helpful if you're looking into financing options. And then I would also recommend checking out Carbon Lighthouse. They've got some innovative solutions in terms of kind of cost sharing that I think are pretty creative for the industry. And certainly CPACE can be great as well.
Thank you for sharing those great resources. I'm curious, can you remind me what year the Plaza was built? I believe it was completed in the 70s, right?
I started construction in 1978.
Okay.
I think the first building was erected, aside from the historical buildings, was 1981.
Wonderful. So if we want to make the building last another 40 plus, 50 plus years, I'm curious, how, Marcel, you're ensuring that your team is prepared to handle the new demands of these advanced systems, and what training is required to make sure that you continue to provide a high level of service to your tenants.
Yeah, it's something that, again, Isaac, it's still new to us. We've undergoing, trainings that are kind of set in place with the manufacturers as this equipment is rolled out and installed. So we made sure that we included, as part of the budget for this installation, to include the education to be able to work on this. So still learning and trying to understand these new systems.
Wonderful. I think this ties in well with Paul's question. He's asking, what are you finding to be the most critical equipment and providers? So we understand that it's not just dependent on you and your team to make this a successful journey, right? So critical might mean its technical role, integrative role, or lead time criticality. And, not necessarily by name, but what other players are you leaning on to guide you through this journey?
Well, basically, for us, boots on the ground, it's more all of the MEP, contractors that are there and that have installed this. So, I just kind of keep, pinging them whenever I have any questions, just trying to use their knowledge, on these systems and what they found out, during other projects, and what they learned. And so, and I think that, with that information, it's definitely helping because, again, I'm seeing the scheduling and the time frame for all this new equipment being installed, and it's reduced quite a bit after this first installation.
Thank you. This is for anybody that really wants to answer, but supply chain constraints are a huge issue. If you live on this planet, you're feeling a supply chain constraint. Can you talk a little bit about how you're dealing with those, and if you're feeling them, and how you've dealt with them?
So it definitely affected this first schedule. From start to finish. This project has been better of 8 months right now. So it was quite some time. We had to deal with a lot of supply chain issues. Manufacturing issues, and so that affected the schedule. So what we had to do, which affected the heating basically for the building. We had to relocate, make plans and relocate the boiler, and temporarily hook that up, and so that was the immediate effect on this project. So we had to go ahead and get that running to keep heating in the building.
Marcel, how old was the boiler that we took out of the basement and put on the roof temporarily?
That one was relatively within 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah, that one was relatively.
Anish, have you heard of, is this impacting building retrofits on a broader scale too? Are supply chain constraints making projects go over time and over budget from your perspective?
I would contextualize this to say that supply chain aside, lead times for all electric equipment, heat pumps, large heat pumps, will always be longer, or not always longer, currently are longer than traditional equipment because suppliers have traditional equipment, conventional equipment in their inventories more often. So we like to say that it makes it all the more important to do proactive planning for decarbonization retrofits and not wait until equipment failure, because at equipment failure, your choices are just going to be limited. So whether or not there's current supply chain disruptions, when we're talking about a robust electrification retrofit, it really is important to plan ahead. And as Becca mentioned, using opportunities that don't come about very often for assets to really take the leap there and make the investment when you have the opportunity, rather than sort of doing a replacement of a conventional piece of equipment and then just kicking the can down the road.
And you got to just ask the questions, right? Like, I mean, I've been doing this for 10 years. I'm lucky to feel extremely supported internally. And then we have great partners like Marcel. But I run into challenges all the time. And I think Levi's is a great example where we had some momentum. We had a project that was a great fit and we felt like it was really worth it to do a big push. Levi's is going to be the model for all of our projects in that region, right? And it's going to be the buildings that we point to. And Marcel and I will do these types of talks, all the time. And so it's a really good education opportunity when you find some momentum and you find some wins. And whether you're sharing internally to other colleagues or other buildings, or even externally, we're all trying to figure it out, right? And I don't think anybody's going to raise their hand and say, I want to be the last to move, or I want to be drug into this or whatever. So I just kind of look at it as playing with the full deck and understanding what our options are and what how we can be proactive, and that's just part of due diligence. Whether or not you have a director of ESG or a rock star engineer, it doesn't matter. That's really how owners should be operating regardless.
It's risk mitigation,
right? Yeah.
So thank you, Becca. So we're moving to the final minutes of our conversation here, and I want to just touch on a handful of Q&A. Where did this one go? Yes. Nathan Summers pointed out a question that Gabriel asked, and good to see you here, Gabriel. Does increased pressure drop require any significant extra airside energy use? So, as we're essentially pumping air through more equipment through a tighter space, are we going to have to use more energy to do that with this?
Well, so far we haven't experienced that. We're running a fan wall system which has multiple fans in our air handlers, so we're able to ramp up or ramp down as we need to. What we've noticed already, even though we had VAVs or variable air volume controls for our or VFDs, excuse me, VFDs for our fans. We were always running, full tilt, running at over 30 amps. And right now we're seeing as little as 6 amps running on our fans right now.
And Marcel, like what you just described, I don't know if anybody in the audience has found themselves in this position, but me trying to explain to a COO or an executive, what Marcel just described, it's really important to like be able to translate that, because when I explain, if I run into a challenge and I need to go to leadership and say like, hey, we really need money for this retrofit, do you not understand that this building is running 100% all the time? I find that when you're able to kind of put that in layman's terms and explain it to somebody maybe like in the finance office that might not be that familiar with building equipment, they understand it, and they're usually like, wow, that doesn't make any sense, let's figure it out. And so I think the more you can kind of help people understand the operator perspective, the more support you're going to get for this stuff that might have just sounded a little bit foreign before.
Yeah, and to also add to Gabriel's question in regards to a significant airdrop, our fans can now push up to about 3 inches of static, where which is a lot of volume, a lot of air compared to our old fans. So the equipment seems to be running more efficiently, right now, and it's something that we're still going to go ahead and see what all of the analysis is after everything is fully implemented. Wonderful.
So just in the last few minutes that we have here, I want to give each of you an opportunity to, for Rebecca and Marcel to illuminate the biggest lessons learned here. And if you could convey anything to anybody that's about to go under this, and hopefully it's many of the folks in our audience very soon, what would that be? And Anish, what your high level considerations are of what do people need to keep in mind when embarking on this potentially scary journey? And I'll kick it to Becca first too.
Okay. For me, I'm going to go back to that priority waterfall. Again, I think, when you think about net zero and decarbonization and all these big topics, to Anisha's point, we really all do feel like we're special snowflakes. And so, my strategy has been to do a lot of education to the team about both what we're doing today and where further gaps and opportunities are. For some projects, they might not have that many energy efficiency or electrification opportunities, and we might be looking more at like on-site solar, for example. And so I would just say, like, don't underestimate the need to kind of educate teams and carry them along. But my other tip would be, put your effort where you have a little bit of momentum. If Marcel wasn't great to work with, I doubt that Levi's Plaza would be our first project, right? So, be selective in what buildings you're choosing to do pilots at, because otherwise you could get a pie in the face and it might not work out. And next thing you know, everybody's naysaying this stuff, and it might have just been a fluke.
For me, it's just basically on the operational, side, just making sure that you try to plan and schedule, with the least amount of impact. On our end, we're always concerned about how we're affecting the tenants. So trying to, get all of the work done and schedule everything where it'll have the least amount of impact to the tenants. It's going to be interesting, kind of moving forward when we do our historical building. That's going to be a challenge, and I'm finding that each one of these buildings are calling for different design. It's not the exact same cookie cutter type of installation, so be prepared to have challenges for different types of buildings.
Thank you, Marcel.
And I would just say, don't miss opportunities on your project. So, when you're even looking at run-of-the-mill, quote, low-hanging fruit energy efficiency investments, Marcel was talking about some of those airside efficiency strategies that are becoming more and more common and notable in commercial real estate. Don't miss that opportunity to think about what the next step is for decarbonizing that building, and whether you can actually use the efficiency gains from the efficiency investment to sort of finance your electrification investment, because the upfront costs right now are a little bit higher. So that's sort of my big takeaway. Yeah.
That's a great point. And one thing that I will add regarding the Levi's Plaza case study is that we actually went through a free retro commissioning process through PG&E prior to embarking on the heat pump upgrades. So I felt like, we were really able to dial in everything like lighting and a lot of other efficiency opportunities before we replaced the major equipment, which was kind of like Marcel, to your point about finding supply. I think that was all pretty helpful.
Wonderful. Well, we're at our closing point here. I want to thank Becca, Anish, and Marcel for an excellent panel and sharing your insights and your lessons learned and being a bit vulnerable with us today. I certainly learned a lot, and I hope our audience did too. Everybody, please enjoy the rest of the conference and feel free to connect with our experts and continue the conversation. And before you leave, we'd really appreciate your feedback in completing the survey on the right side of the screen if you just click that button. I hope everybody enjoys their Electrify.
Thanks, Isaac. Thanks, y'all. Thanks for chatting. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.